well. The Twitter sphere is, if that's a proper term, is just a buzz.
Yes.
And we were actually just speaking about this. So the 8th District, and this is really something that's been kind of happening on Twitter for a while, or at least tonight.
Yeah, tonight.
So what's happening in the 8th District?
Yeah, the 8th Congressional District, Joanne Emerson, longtime incumbent, is leaving to take a lobbyist post. And they're having their first forum of about 17 Republicans who are vying to replace her, including Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder and some others. Well, we've been following this on Twitter, whereas, I mean, a few years ago, you couldn't do this. So we're following what's going on at the forum. And immediately, everyone was twittering the fact that the announcer, the moderator, announced that she had shot a squirrel for breakfast, and therefore she was obviously not against gun control. I made that very clear. But the point being that, and everyone's twittering this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of snarky comments from the Democratic side. If they did as many tweets as you know, the amount of money that they could put in there, I think that maybe they would have a chance. That was a bad analogy.
Well, but there's been a lot of observations about the different candidates. Like one candidate, a lot of people were twittering that he'd voted for a couple pro-St. Louis things, the China hub, so that might hurt him.
Okay.
So a lot of stuff like that you're seeing that, as I said, a couple years ago, you wouldn't see that type of thing where people can actually read what people are saying and what people are thinking while it's happening.
So this is making an impact, really, in the process.
Yes, because this is an insider game. The nominee for both major parties will be picked by the insiders in the 8th District for an election that the average people will vote for, but the insiders will pick the nominee.
You know, one of the things I want to bring up on our Facebook page when we asked them to, you know, what kind of questions, Tara Daniels mentioned education reform. Is this something, you know, from Missouri, the state, we've heard it before, is this something really going to be addressed in 2013?
Well, this is one of Speaker Tim Jones' 3 E's. He's got education, he's got energy
and the economy.
You know, going forward, it's one of his lesser talked about E's, though.
Well, he wants to get rid of tenure.
It's always a thorny. It's always been a thorny issue in the Missouri legislature because there's always been a vocal segment of the Republican Party and a small part of the Democratic Party that wanted to make so-called education reform a big deal, whether that is, you know, tuition tax credits or vouchers or anything like that. There's always been legislation, but it's always run in opposition from education groups and some Republicans who are more favorable to them. And whether it runs into that brick wall, I think, remains to be seen.
Well, and she also brought up locally, I mean, not just statewide. I mean, is this with accreditation in St. Louis Public Schools, is this something, you know, temporary? You know, what they recently, is this something, is it going to play out in 2013 locally? What's it look like for St. Louis Public Schools and some of the others?
Well, there is a public school election for the school board in the city of St. Louis in April. And the public schools has always been an issue, like in the St. Louis mayor's race. Even though the mayor doesn't have any direct control over it, it's always something where whoever's running for mayor always cites it as they're going to try to do what they can, use their bully pulpit to try to improve the public schools. And the same thing in the legislature, they always talk about some of the problems with the urban school districts and also how they want to help the suburban schools. So it's always an issue.
It's not only St. Louis, but it's also Kansas City now, because Kansas City lost accreditation relatively recently. So not only is the issue of St. Louis schools always going to be lingering within the legislature, but now it's this added, you know, problem of Kansas City and elsewhere.
Sure, and one last one that I wanted to bring up was Kendra Denise mentioned jobs and job development for the state. Is this going to be a topic on the agenda for 2013 in Jefferson City?
Pretty typical conservative fare in terms of what is going to create jobs. It's going to be, you know, Speaker Jones has been saying that he's going to make the government get out of the way. He's going to lower business taxes, or he wants to lower business taxes, and he's hoping that that will drive up jobs.
Well, and they want to change workers' compensation and some other related programs deemed pro-business. So there will be a lot of discussion about that versus tax credits that the state has to encourage development in various areas. In the urban areas, the big thing is the historic tax credits and also the tax credits to encourage low-income housing. And so there's always a battle about putting a ceiling on that.
But they talk about every candidate talks
Right.
about jobs.
Right.
You can talk
And in 2011, the legislature tried a couple of times to take up a pretty wide-ranging economic development bill with all the things that Joe mentioned, not only in the general session, but in a special session. And both times it failed pretty spectacularly. So when I was talking about can Republicans get along with each other, that was when the various factions of the Republican Party clashed the most, and it caused the most damage, basically.
And in terms of jobs, it's also, this is something that we've been talking about before, it's also possible that there are going to be laws enacted that restrict the rights of unions, restrict the ability of unions. It probably won't, come under the label of right to work,
Right.
which probably would not pass muster for
Right,
if it's
because-
been vetoed.
We saw that in other states.
But some of the provisions, I mean, they're
Yes.
going to try to enact some of the provisions like to eliminate payroll deduction of union dues, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So that's something that's being looked at as well. So the Republicans who control the legislature, there's some talk about trying to do that.
But a lot of Republicans were endorsed by labor unions this last election cycle, and if that comes up, especially when it comes time to override a veto, they're going to be very much pressured to sustain that veto because of their labor ties.
Nixon has sworn that this is going to get a veto from him if it comes to pass, and the margin for their supermajority is very thin. So they would have to have everybody on board, and I don't think that they have those.
They may
numbers.
not, because in the suburban areas, particularly some of the suburban Republicans, especially in the state Senate, aren't likely to go along with some of that. So you're going to see in some cases that it's not just along party lines, it's along geographic lines. It's the rural legislators versus the urban suburban legislators.
Well, this is.